Okay, Wolfgang?
Okay.
Ja, schön, dass ihr alle da seid. Freut mich sehr, euch hier im Buchhändlerkeller begrüßen zu dürfen. Ich fange mal mit einer kurzen deutschen Einführung an. Die Veranstaltung selber wird ja dann auf Englisch stattfinden. Es geht um einen Abend der Zwischenräume, könnte man sagen. Ich möchte mal kurz auf diesen Titel eingehen. Zwischenräume als gesamte Welt, Counterwriting und durchkreuzte Narrative. Zwischenräume sind hier Räume, die sich in Entwürfen von Welt auftun, die aber häufig über diese Grenzen hinweg in anderen Weltentwürfen ein Mitschwingen finden. Einfach weil es global gewisse Machtstrukturen gibt, die raumeinnehmend wirken. Und eben weil Raum zwanghaft eingenommen wird, ist der Zwischenraum Existenzgrundlage für all das, was sich jenseits dieser Machtstrukturen bewegt. Und das ist häufig verdammt viel. Eine Struktur ist kein Mensch und Strukturen einen Spiegel vorhalten funktioniert nicht. Wenn man nicht jedem Menschen einen Spiegel vorhält, der zu einem Sich-Erkennen im anderen bereit ist. Counterwriting wiederum hat oft diesen Gegenentwurf zum Ziel. Ein Text oder eine Form des Textes, wie vielleicht auch ein Kunstwerk eines ist, das einen gewissen anerkannten literarischen oder eben künstlerischen Kanon hinterfragt und Zwischenräumen zu dem verhilft, was sie eigentlich sind, nämlich Teil des Ganzen. Und warum nun eigentlich durchkreuzte Narrative? Narrative durchkreuzen sich, das liegt, glaube ich, in der Natur der Narration. Niemand könnte eine Geschichte gleich erzählen, aber genau darin liegt ein unbeschreiblich großer Fundus für mögliche Reflexionen auf einen selbst. Durchkreuzen klingt irgendwie drastisch, aber durchkreuzen kann auch ein Finden von ähnlichen Ansätzen, von möglichen Zielen oder ein Überschneiden der Erzählwege bedeuten. Sarah Nansubuga, die sich heute mit Pamela Enyonu und Anna Kücking austauschen wird, eröffnet in ihren Gedichten eine solche Perspektive. Ich versuche mal einen sehr unvollständigen Versuch der Zusammenfassung. Es wird ein Raum geschaffen für keinen anderen Zweck als um des Raumes willen. Ein Raum des Ungehorsams, des Widerstands, ein Raum im Sturm, den kein Wind etwas anhaben kann. Ein Raum der Möglichkeit, mehr Raum zu schaffen, mehr zu nehmen, als zugestanden wird. Wir werden vielleicht überrascht sein, was sich daraus ergibt.
Hey Sarah, hey Pamela, it's so nice to have you here tonight. I'm really excited to see you again. We will start with you, Sarah. You are going to read a poem for us, which then we will be discussing. I think it would make sense if Pamela and I no, I can't because I'm leaving, but it would be nice to see only you, so I'm changing the view, so we will only see you. And I would say we will start right away, right? With you. I'm very excited. There we go. Yeah.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Sarah Nansubuga. I am an actress, a poet, a teacher, a playwright, and a general lover of the theatrical arts. I'm really honored to share space and time with everyone in the room, and I'm excited to share this piece for the second time around. This piece is a poem in 5 parts, and it was originally written for the Moving Identities Festival at Zwischenräume in Kampala, Uganda, in association with Alliance Française, and it was written under the theme of feminism. So I look forward to sharing it, and I look forward to hearing feedback. I look forward to the discussion afterwards. All right. What can I call it? A poem in 5 parts. Part 1, and in between. You caught me in the middle of a thought, found me in the center of a course of an undefinable pursuit of understanding, and you asked me to make space. Space, I said. What on earth do you mean? Make space, you said. Create room for the paths which will soon be formed, the curbs which will soon be found among roads that only go one way. Make space, you said, where only mountains have found roots. Make space where only water has found a home, where only sky has found blue, where only I can find you. Make space, you said. Like a weather finds between a car and a brick wall, like a mother finds between 1,000 shillings and a full meal, like a man finds between a rock and a hard place, like a child finds between a command and its imagination, like an ant finds between a crumb and a drop. I pondered what you said, but did not understand. It was amorphous, your request, nebulous, indigenous with worry and collected in a vacant stare, at once at home with ill ease and comfort, misuse and age, like a pair of shoes kept away in a box, like a restaurant closed in the middle of a war, like a town frozen in time after a nuclear blast. Space, you said. Make space on the plate where all who want can approach, but where only those who can eat. Make space on the field where only grass grows under rooted feet. Make space on the spaceship that would leave a dying earth behind. Make space on the dollar you would use to buy your last meal, in the jar which holds the last handful of flour, among the 5 loaves and 4 fish. Make room on the lifeboat that would escape a sinking ship. Make room on the table, make room on the chair, make room in your anger for a pardon unseen, room for forgiveness, for change in tradition, for moss on a rock, for water in a desert, for joy in grief. Make room, you said. Make space, you implored. Create a place for everyone and anyone, not for who they are or for what they can do, but for the sake of it. Make space. Part 2. A mouthful of fangs. Is there a place you can't help going back to? I've had one of those. A steep and scary slide sucks sanity slowly and I am slipping. My dreams met reality in the best way possible. On the plate of money. On this plate, all are free to eat. The only thing to stop you is your mouth. How large can you grow? How deep is the cavernous longing within you? Teeth aren't required, only a long, steep vacuum and you are falling. Though the plate is big, the forks are small, and hands are not allowed, and that is all. There are no other rules but to bite your opponent. Make sure they don't win, make sure you're on it. Line up your target and bite down deep on the plate of money, my friends. There are no secrets to keep. But what happens when you are taught different? When you are taught to take small, dainty bites? When you are taught that a woman wipes her mouth and not her fingers because she doesn't use them? Duh. My friends, this is where I unlearn. This is where you find new liberty in disobedience. I have seen women with mouths larger than ogres. They take big bites and use no tissues. This is level ground, my friends. And only the strong survive. Cash is the language of our green and blue world. Only for versatile mouths can it be unfurled. Part 3. A story. I love the space that the wind gives me. I'm never in its way. Just another form to blow over, around and about. I'm neither living nor dead to it. I just am. It acknowledges the space I take up and moves accordingly, neither one of us impeded by the presence or movement of the other. Sometimes, though, I feel a certain push. I sense a tension in his formless hands, a wishing that I was not there, a longing for the flat, wild lands of our predecessors, where I could tear about with freedom, uprooting tuba trees and turning ponds into streams with no remorse. These times are rare, these longings are sparse, and often we walk hand in hand, the wind and I, making room for each other in this brick and mortar world. On one such day, we met perchance. The wind and I neither looked askance. The road was clear, the way of peace, the morning subtle, a balmy bliss. All sounds of hustle and bustle seemed far. A creaking bird, a groaning car. My mind was full of unsaid thoughts, of pleasant things like love and chicken wings. Then through my haze a motor sounded. The laughter of a man at once abounded. He leaned over forward on his handlebars and promised me love and money and cars. I politely declined and the wind pulled me on. Yet the man made pursuit and again carried on. The more I resisted, the more he persisted, until at last he made me an offer I couldn't refuse. If I let the wind go, he offered me recluse, a dark and musty room with my head in his zipper, beaming, and he said it, his manner ever chipper. There was a sudden stillness as the words left his mouth. The man saw my shock and pointed eagerly at a house. I had nothing to say and everything to fear. I stood still as a board and hoped to disappear. After a few moments, he cursed me and fled, his motor loud and blaring, leaving silence in his stead. The world that was muted clashed to sound and sudden color. The wind, my companion, fled like snow in the summer. I was disoriented, I must admit. When the man rode away and left me like a dimwit, I pondered his request and wondered what it meant, and wondered if he truly was the one that heaven sent, the one I prayed for, the one I stayed for, the one I looked for every day on the streets I was made for. In the wake of his fumes, there was puzzlement and loss, as though catcalling somehow made me more of a lady boss, a princess among women, a bird among fish. Attention is attention. You either get it or you wish. At least that's what they say. At least that's what they claim. That for a leopard to earn her spots, she must at least have been named. These days, the wind does not walk with me as much. He teases my hair. He ruffles my skirt. His innocence is charming, but he holds it at bay, once bitten, twice shy, is why the wind doesn't come out to play. We're both now too grown for hand-holding. Part 4. A what if? The external locus of control. The degree to which we assign responsibility for our choices, for our thoughts, for our desires, for our actions, through which we make our choices. What if I told you? What if I told you, girl child, don't sleep on yourself, don't forget yourself among the thronging multitude. Remember your vision, remember your calling, remember the words your mother whispered to you, the warnings your father gave you, the side eye your aunt shot towards you when you stopped to rest your feet. What if I told you, girl child, to remember them? Remember them when slumber pulls your eyelashes together, when it encourages them to break bread at the end of the day, sever that connection without mercy. Do not sleep on this opportunity. The opportunity to be seen, the opportunity to be heard, the opportunity to take up space. Girl child, take up your space. Is there a space in your company? Take it. Is there a space in your church? Take it. A space on the street between four men hogging the non-existent sidewalk? Take it. A space on the bus? Take it. Forget the old and disregard the young. Secure the bag. Break the internet. Rule the world because God is a woman. Because manifestation is the new religion of go-getters. Because who run the world? Girls. Yes, girl child. What if I told you, eat? This is your table. Leave no dish unturned. Here we have the university, diversity higher, seeking women of color from a nation far, far away. Fill your plate and eat. Over here, we have a foundation looking to fund further studies for a minority group, preferably of African origin, in the field of engineering. Fill your plate and eat. Over there, we have a federation for women lawyers looking for women to defend, even if you must pretend. Fill your plate and eat. Over there, we have the middle-aged white man seeking youth in a woman half his age. Fill your plate and eat. Over here, we have a corporate office dying for a female CEO, even if you must lie on your CV, girl child. Fill your plate and eat. The dishes are plenty and the takers are few. They are afraid, but you are not. They do not know that the chef only cooks every few decades when the world remembers that women are people too. Therefore, fill your plate. After all, They all want a piece of you. Why not take a piece of them? The talent seekers, job creators, blouse peepers, church groups, grant givers, ego soothers, gift offerers, promise makers, leaf turners, and cat callers, all clamoring to get a piece of you. What if I told you, girl child, to eat them up, to leave not a crumb? What if I told you that the locus of control is the degree to which we assign responsibility to teachers, preachers, politicians, poets, who say, but do not do? What if I told you that none of this was true? What if I told you? Part 5. Sometimes when we repeat things, we hope for them to somehow become profound. Sometimes when we say things over and over, when we beat the dead horse into submission, we hope that the pulverized ears will somehow take stock of weaponized words. Let us pile women high up, one upon another. Let us celebrate the blossoming feminine beings and gawk at their intelligence, surprised that they can fly an airplane. Bessie Coleman, the first African American and first Native American to hold a pilot's license, surprised that they can write a book. Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi, author of Half a Yellow Sun, surprised that they can go to space. Ellen Ochoa, the first Hispanic woman to go to space, surprised that they can lead a country. Margaret Thatcher, the nation's first female prime minister and first woman to lead a major Western country. Or surprised that they can cook a meal. Julia Child, recognized for bringing French cuisine to the American public. Let us hold women high in awe of their ability to do something other than have breasts and bear children. As if motherhood is the one and only defining factor of a woman's worth, sometimes we crush women into long lines of firsts and seconds, into high piles of womanliness or femininity, the one defining factor that can make an achievement mean something more. Sometimes we make women into statues, into goddesses, into perfect Venus-like beings of immortality, praiseworthy, but only for hardship, noteworthy, but only for struggle, accolade-worthy, but only for extreme and intense perseverance, as if we are all not fighting to make it one day to the next. Sometimes we pull women apart. We cut them into bite-sized pieces, Sarah Bartman style, a brain for one and a heart for another. One woman's sleigh is another woman's hustle. One's integrity is another's stepping stone. Another's intelligence is her counterpart's stumbling block. It is almost as if they belong to one another instead of to themselves, as if all women could ever be is part of the wonderful whole which makes up perfection. Sometimes we stray from the path of righteousness to justify our justice. Count Frollo calls down hellfire on the gypsy girl he cannot have and forgets that beneath the swaying hips is a beating heart. Sometimes we build a statue of Wonder Woman in our minds and forget to show our mother's grace. We create a standard so laughable that we forget to laugh when we cannot accomplish it. There is joy in the mountain as well as in the valley. There is worth on the world stage and in the hidden eyes of forgetful children, in the first female president and the first-time mother, in the first female astronaut and the first successful Luwombo. Those things are difficult to make. There is priceless value in waking up every day and preserving your sanity and pursuing your hustle and forgetting your enemies and embracing your friends and finding love in familiar eyes instead of praise in unfamiliar mouths. Aspire, but remember that you also inspire. There are many who you meet in thoughtless passing. Humanity moves on really quickly, and the names on the plaques of admiration are written, erased, and worn off with time. But the names and hearts find immortality in the shared space of memory. So cut yourself a break. You are doing just fine. Thank you.
You can hear me well, right? Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. So there are really many aspects I would like to pick up on in this poem because I find it was very clear and enriching, exciting, and it strikes me on very many levels. First, on a personal one, because it's a speech of support, distinction, and empowerment. And it speaks also to my experience and my struggles as a woman, also a working class woman, and of course in a different way than it probably speaks to Pamela or to you. But if you don't mind, I for now want to talk about the motive we find in there. One I think is very dominant throughout the poem, and it's the motive of space. And as we all heard, there's a voice telling someone to take space. And it seems to me that throughout the poem there are two forms of space addressed. So the first, there's the space you can find in your mind, right? Like where your thoughts can flourish. It's like a liberated, open field. And this stands in opposition to like internalized, maybe diminishing thoughts. And the second, there's a space you can consider material, like your environment and the surroundings you find in it. So I was wondering that in your practice, how does writing help you to address those dualities? Or are there even dualities? What's their relationship?
Thank you, Anna. I think it's interesting that you made the distinction between the physical space and the immaterial space. I think writing enables me to explore the immaterial space. There are lots of ideas that we talk about when we're talking about equality, and many of these ideas exist in the immaterial before they come into the material. So writing for me in that process, it helps me to make tangible the immaterial so that I can apply it to what I see every day. And when I talk about making space, it's not just for women. I think there are lots of, first off, marginalized societies, groups of people, but also it's very easy to go through the world, especially as it stands, with a cynical outlook and to think I'm here for me and I'm doing what I need to do right now. But I really think it's important for every individual to create room wherever they are and with however little they have, because you don't know what blessing you can bring to someone else. I'm reminded of this, there's an old Bible story. There's a prophet named Elisha, I think. It was either Elijah or Elisha. And he goes into a town during a famine. I think it's Elijah. And there's a Shunammite woman. And he's hungry. And he says to her, make me a loaf of bread. And she says, to tell you the truth, all I have left is a handful of flour and a little bit of oil. I'm going to make a loaf for me and my son, and we're going to die. That was her plan. And then he said, well, make me a loaf first. And at first glance, it seems really selfish because this woman has literally said she's starving and this is all she has. But out of that small sacrifice came a miracle where the flour never ran out and the oil never ran out. And even if you're not religious, I think that some who believe maybe in karma, what you give is what you get. So I think when I say make space, I mean, it's an encouragement that no matter where you are or what you have, there's always something you can give. There's always some way to share. There's always some way to bring light to someone else's journey, even with the tiniest action. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Maybe I had to think about how it is also both, right? Like to take and give, and how I was wondering just now what comes first, like if there actually is a hierarchy. Maybe Pamela, you want to also join in with your thoughts?
I think the thing that jumps out at me most, I think it's in the third stanza or the second stanza, second part, and it's almost like a proactive call. to take up space. And as we all know that in any spaces, power is not given to you. You sort of have to take it because nobody wants to, let go of any power. And for me, this poem manages to both ask for this space, but also call you to action to take this space, which I find really empowering and powerful, and also proactive, because I'm all about pro-action. So I really love that about the poem. It puts to the forefront. I mean, what I love about Sarah's poem, it's a poem that I can read to my grandmother and she will understand. It's a poem that I can read to my mother, and I don't even need to mention the word feminism. I just have to say that and they will get it. And for me, that really appeals to me because as people in my country, or rather in my community, we still struggle with feminism as a practice, as a theory, so among my sisters and among people who we tend to share about feminism, we've always talked about translating it, because sometimes it gets too academic, and then if you're not as educated, or you don't speak English properly, or you don't have the right vocabularies, then it becomes lost in the wind. It becomes a thing for people who are educated, or women who are frustrated, because it's lost in translation. And Sarah's poem is that kind of poem. Even if I translated it to Luganda or to Ateso right now, my people would get it, and I love it.
Yeah, thank you, Pamela. I also really like that about the poem. It is very applicable to very many people and different circumstances. And I think you can read it silently to yourself, and it has a very interesting, charming quality, and you can read it out loud. And I'm really sad right now that you aren't here, because it's also when I saw you reading it on stage, it was also such a mind-blowing moment. I was just saying to me, like, "Ugh." And I really think though that it also lives out of the performance and lives out of being spoken. So I was wondering, can you maybe elaborate a little bit on oral storytelling, how that might be like something that strikes you, something that is in your practice, a thing you perform, you keep up on, and how that might be in Ugandan practice. And okay, that's many questions. Maybe we stop here and then we go forward.
Okay. I think I found that particular question and the list interesting because of the conversation that we had prior, just about how oral storytelling lives on through different art forms, like through music in Uganda and through theater in Uganda and through art in Uganda. There's always a story underlying, there's always a narrative, and that narrative is so, what's the word, multifaceted. So it expresses itself through music and through dance and through drama and through costumes and different characters. And I'm a huge fan of our oral tradition because it's an embodiment, it's kind of like a reservoir of a culture that almost doesn't exist anymore. This is a conversation I've had with my parents and my parents' friends, and we talk about how our kind of age bracket is a floating identity where we're not quite sure how we're rooted in our nation, but at the same time, the culture that we're living, we don't belong to. So we're kind of floating, not really belonging anywhere, not really understanding our roots, and at the same time, not really understanding the Western culture that influences our lifestyle so much. So that's why I love oral tradition, and that's why I'm so interested in its preservation, is that it's a reservoir for culture. It can be used, it's very, very translatable, and it's used to pass on so much more than just a story. And I think that's my biggest take home. The story is kind of like the tip of the iceberg, and everything else it has to offer is all the way down here. All the morals and the lessons and the history and the practices for all the, I think there are 56 different tribal groups in Uganda. It preserves so much. And because it's so rich, it's if you haven't grown up listening to it, I feel very deprived for having not heard more of it in my childhood. Yeah.
Thank you. Pamela, do you also?
Yes, my grandmother was a great storyteller. She was very funny. And before she died, or rather towards her old age, she used to ask people to bribe her with a cigarette. So you give her a cigarette and then she tells you a story. So I absolutely connect with the idea. I connect with the idea of oral storytelling and the oral histories. But one of the things that I find fascinating about oral culture is how inclusive it is. And I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine about archiving, and especially archiving rooted in African culture. And it came out that from my opinion, and I'm not an expert on this, so I could be challenged on this, the way Africans, or rather the way we tend to the relationship we have with knowledge is shared. It's not something to hoard, something to hide away so that you don't know it. So there is a constant retelling of things, constant ways of finding ways to gather people so they can share this knowledge. And that is deeply rooted in our music, it's deeply rooted in the way we entertain each other, the way we spend leisure. It's all spent around sharing these stories. They could be fiction, they could be real life. And we're very animated when we tell these stories because there is also an entertainment part of it. You want to take somebody on this journey, and you want them to feel the river, to feel the lake, because those are things that make the story the textures of the story. And so it's quite nice, and I think a lot of us are really attached to this. And I think the equivalent could be, I think for the Western world, the bedtime stories, that performative action of telling this story night after night. But for us, now the difference between us is that you don't tell it to one child. You tell it to the whole compound, and everybody keeps adding to this story. And therein lies the beauty in this oral production.
Totally. Yeah, I found it interesting when I was traveling in Kenya and then later was in Uganda. In Kenya, I met a researcher who was based in Berlin, but she was born on Lamu at an island, and she was researching to oral storytelling. And we had an interesting discussion about it because she also told me that the stories are changed at some point, because it's so individualistic in a way. It is the community who listens to it, the community who shares, who's like anticipating with their bodies, but it is one person who's telling it. And this person maybe changed the word or gives a different mimic or gesture to the story. So it's very, very personal and very different. And I found it interesting because it's still, she was looking at the connection of the storytelling and oral history. So like getting the stories from somewhere. Also being aware of the fact that they are changing, which is maybe an antagonist to the Western understanding or past Western understanding of history, basically. So like history is something that can be written down and then it is somehow set, and there are those facts. And I sometimes felt that this was some sort, or for me at least, it comes much closer to my perception of what the past is, namely something constructed, something that can be changed in the present, than a written form of or a document of that's how it was and how it will always be, So like the past becomes negotiable through that, and I really like that aspect of it as well.
Mm.
And would you then say that this form of storytelling, or this form of also poetry, because it is, in my understanding it is, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm very happy to learn more, but would you say it is a feminist practice? It could be called a feminist practice, and if yes, why?
I think right off the bat, I'm going to say not necessarily. I think, like Pamela said, these stories kind of belong to the community. And very often, again, Pamela, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's the oldest person or the most knowledgeable person who tells the stories, because they're kind of passed down. So I wouldn't call it a feminist practice, I'd call it more a community practice. And I don't know, I've been thinking about the statement that you just made about the past being negotiable. And I love that statement, because there's so many pros and cons depending on which history you're looking at. But it creates a space of negotiation where whoever feels inspired in the moment can contribute something, and that contribution can either be accepted or discarded by the community. And if it's accepted, it comes to life in the next retelling, and if it's discarded, it kind of disappears, and it's kind of ephemeral in that way, where it stays in that one telling of the story. But I wouldn't call all tradition feminist, because it's not necessarily practiced just by females. Yes, there are matriarchal societies on the African continent, but all in all, I'd say it's a community practice where the stories are housed in the community. And yeah, I think.
Thank you.
I don't know about storytelling being feminist, but I'm currently trying to make an argument that Ubuntu, or the concept of Ubuntu, is feminist. How I'm going to prove that, I don't know, but hear me out. So, Ubuntu, or the philosophy of Ubuntu, is
now we can't hear out the technical. We would have all be ready.
It basically means your humanity. Hello?
Yeah, for a second. Yeah, now.
Slight interruption.
Now we can hear you again, and we're very ready to hear you now. Hopefully the connection is too.
Okay. All right. So what I was saying, these are my reasons for why I think Ubuntu is feminist. One, Ubuntu means I am because you are. And feminism basically almost rides in a similar tangent, whereby we're recognizing the humanity and the space for all genders. Right. Now, the second reason why I think Ubuntu is feminist is communities were started by women, the earliest communities, at least as far as my history tells me. And because men were off to war or hunting or just lying around on a rock somewhere, whatever they were doing, women were creating livable, habitable communities. But even today in my country, town centers are started by women. The lady who's roasting maize on the street, the one who's selling foodstuffs by the road, they identify a good spot in the community and turn that into a busy, active town center. So what does that mean? With that premise, if women invented communities, they definitely must have contributed a lot to the rules that govern this community, and thus giving back to this idea of Ubuntu. because I'm sure they had to take in strangers, they had to welcome in new people. So I'm currently exploring that intersection of Ubuntu and feminism, because I've been on this journey of trying to learn African feminisms, what that means, and it's taken me into looking into practices. Obviously, because of colonialism and slavery, there was a lot of cultural genocide. So all this information is not there. I have to look to the remnants of it, you know, and these are the practices that are still living today in my community, and to sort of make the connections between what I have learned as a feminist and what my grandmothers, what my mothers, what my aunties were instilling in me, even without knowing the existence of the word feminism. Mm-hmm. So is oral tradition feminist? I think I would have to concur with Sarah saying it's a community practice, but I think it's female-led. So I will take that.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I was asking this question because I read a book of a Ugandan author called Jennifer Makumbi, and it's called The First Woman. And there she creates a world where a young girl is a storyteller. And she, for her, telling the stories has a very emancipating and empowering impact. And so I was wondering about how it can be feminist. Interestingly, she's telling a story about a girl being buried in an anthill because the father only wants boy childs. It is in very interesting tension, you know, but she's conquering the story at the end of the book or throughout the story. I want to maybe draw the attention a little bit to space again, and I think that can also correlate with Ubuntu, or what you said, Pamela, about talking to grandmothers, talking to mothers, and finding out their stories, taking them somewhere, telling them to a bigger audience. When we talk about spaces, I directly have to think about safe spaces. And for those who don't know what safe spaces is, it's like a concept or and a political practice of marginalized people where they can withdraw from the dominant requirements of patriarchal conditions and charge their batteries, formulate thought. And in those safe spaces, which can also in German be the Zwischenräume we find in our title, thought is produced, and it's a very particular kind of thought. It's a thought that is much more liberated because it knows it can flourish, whereas in patriarchal conditions, as a woman, I think being born and raised there, you get the idea of that your thoughts might not be as interesting, or you have to speak differently, or you should rather do other things than speaking because this place is reserved. And I wondered, what is your safe space right now? Do you have some? And how does it look like?
Pamela, you get to go first.
Oh God, what is my safe space? I think my safe space is my writing. You know, I've always struggled with expressing myself verbally. I've always been a clown, so I can always hide any real feelings I have through jokes. But when I write, I'm as pure as I can get, because my writing it happens now. If I have a feeling, if I want to express something, I'll sit down, write notes, and even forget about it. Nowadays, I'm learning not to destroy my poems, because I used to write them down and quickly tear them apart, because I didn't want people knowing that much, you know, about me. I didn't want people entering that inner world, because it was mine, and I was very selfish with it. So if you are going to ask me what my safe space looks like, it is my writing, it is my home, my bedroom, my favorite hangout. is to do nothing on my bed. And most recently, my studio, because I started practicing art about 5 years ago, and it was more for mental health purposes. But now it's established itself as a path that I need to be in, and I feel free in there, free of judgment, free of everything. So that's currently what my safe space looks like. Sarah.
I must say that I completely resonate with the bed being a safe space. Like, there's nothing like your own bed. It's just you and your thoughts, and in addition to just the solace of my bedroom, I think my safe space right now, going with the idea of a kind of there being physical and non-physical spaces, my safe space as a theater artist especially is a space in which artists can live and work without fear of coercion, without fear of suppression, without fear of being taken advantage of, and without fear of manipulation. Mm-hmm. So any space where a theater artist can bring their craft, bring their talent, bring their time, bring their ideas, and be valued, supported, paid, encouraged to move forward, that's my safe space. I think I thrive in places like those, and I've been very privileged to find a few in Kampala, in and around Kampala in Uganda. Anywhere where I think theatre and film artists can work and live in peace. And I think that, that definition differs, but mm-hmm. I'm so passionate mm-hmm. for theatre artists receiving funding and receiving support for their ideas mm-hmm. and receiving encouragement for their ideas, even when they're just a seed, and they haven't yet taken form. That's my safe space, where theatre and film artists can thrive. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How would you say are those spaces represented in Kampala right now? How easy is it to get in there, and what would you wish for to widen or to be changed, or would tell someone who's very young, maybe young people are watching it now as well, they know you from the theater, like I do, from a very beautiful Shakespeare play, which was a great different experience than German theater, because everyone was really excited, and in Germany everyone was like sitting like this. So what would you give them as advice maybe?
I think that's a complex question, but I think the foundation of that question is do unto others as you'd like them to do for you. Mm-hmm. So the spaces that I've encountered where that kind of environment is pioneered comprises of artistic leaders who are passionate about an ensemble work ethic, who are not thinking about their own innovation per se, but they're interested in the group coming together to achieve a purpose, and in all of us being equal pieces of the same pie, So it really comes down to the people. And I think that if you're looking to enter a space like that, it starts with your own work ethic. Mm-hmm. So how do you treat people when you're on a set, when you're working on a theatre project? How do you respond to criticism? How do you respond to ill treatment, because that teaches you a lot as well? I think it really comes down to the person. Create the space that you want to work in. Of course, we learn more as we work in different spaces, but it really comes down, especially young artists, it really comes down to number one, why you're entering the space. Why is the theatre and film space somewhere that you want to be? What is your ultimate passion or purpose for being in that space? And being really honest with yourself and your intentions. And two, what kind of legacy do you want to leave in that space? So everywhere you work, you leave a little seedling, and the people around you who you've left there, depending on how you planted that seed or what seed you planted, that determines how they will water it for you. Mm-hmm. So if you leave a good seedling, when you come back, you'll find a tree, because they'll have watered it. They'll say, okay, this person works like this, and all those words are watering that seed that you've left. If you leave a bad seedling, when you come back, you're going to find what you left. So I'd really say make the space that you want to be in. And I guess I'm privileged to have had the opportunity to make that space a little bit, to some degree, but it starts even at whatever level you're at. How are you operating? You are the tea bag in the tea, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Pamela, what would you say?
Yeah, I concur with what she says, but I do want to share directly to the question you asked, do those spaces exist in Kampala? Yes, they do. And I'm very jealous of the performing arts and theatre people, because they've managed to keep the spaces alive and active. I'll give you 3 examples. There's the Lantern Meet of Poets. It's basically regular people who love poetry. When you go to the Lantern Meet of Poets, you meet people from all walks of life, doctors, engineers, anybody who just likes, and they are not just listeners, or they're also, sharing the poems they've written. And I found that space quite open and welcoming. But my very favorite space is, I don't know, it no longer exists because I know its founder moved to Kenya. It's called Bonfire. Now, I used to love to go to Bonfire a lot. I think it used to be on Thursday nights at the National Theatre. And the thing that I loved about Bonfire was the type of poets that came. There were these young orphan boys that would walk from across town to come and perform. You could perform in any language. And Luganda happens to be my favorite language. And these young men would perform. Luganda is such a beautiful language, my God. It's very musical and very lyrical. So these young men would perform in Luganda, and they felt confident and safe. And I absolutely love that, because sometimes these safe spaces, we also have to acknowledge the fact that sometimes practicing art is a bit of a privilege for some. So sometimes these spaces are not very open to many people, especially people who can't speak good English. That's always a problem. People who maybe don't share the same social class or same similar education background. But what I really loved about Bonfire, those boundaries did not exist. If you had a poem and you wanted to present it in a language you're comfortable with, whether we understood it or we didn't, like there was that energy to allow you, express yourself in your chosen medium. And I found that really, really beautiful. Of course, the other spaces, feminist spaces, queer spaces, religious spaces, I guess, whatever scratches your back, I'm sure your people will find you and you will find you.
Nice. Yeah, thank you. I think maybe it is time, Pamela, you told me that you always start your visuals with a poem. And after you read one, you can maybe elaborate a little bit on this. But first, I would be really happy to now hear your poetry. Your starting poetry. I will change the view again so we only see you. And then the stage is yours.
Hey, disclaimer, I have never read poetry in public, so.
Premiere, world premiere.
This will be the first time. So the poem is called, it's very short, just 4 stanzas, 5 lines each. So it's called When They Gave Blessings. When they gave blessings, mine were poured on the ground. So I may bend to pick them up, overturning every obstacle for opportunities underneath. When they gave blessings, mine were flung into the sky, carried away by the wind. Now I wonder in wonder where they fell. When they gave blessings, mine were put in a cave, buried deep within the earth, never to see the light of day. When they gave blessings, mine were placed in a basket and sent down the river. Now here I am, always on the brink.
Thank you, Pamela. It's very brave that you're sharing this poem with us. It's really nice. Do you want to tell us more about why that came up, what space you were in, what followed after?
I think I was in a space of self-doubt. I will be honest. I was wondering if everything I was doing would amount to something. I was in the middle of a huge production for an exhibition I was having, and I was having doubt in what I was doing because it seemed like throughout my career, I've always been at the brink, you know, always having to overcome one obstacle or another. So I began to think about this idea. I worked in advertising just as a background. And in advertising, we claim it's a creative industry. We claim it's a meritocracy. You just have to be good at your copywriting or good at your graphic design or art direction. And it's not the truth. The truth is that you have to kiss up to the bosses, kiss up to the art directors, and if you're a woman, you sort of have to stay late so you can drink with the boys, you know, smoke with the boss. And it was extremely frustrating because if you had to be home early, like 5, then it so happened that the people who were usually in front of the creative directors were men. So they would always be seen and their ideas would always be high. And then when I moved into the the art industry, I also began to feel similar struggles whereby it's like, oh, your art will speak. Or, you know, it will be, if it's good, it was good. But then you realize the opportunities are not the same, to be in the spaces are not the same, your narratives may not be understood because of the different backgrounds. And it got me thinking about this idea of meritocracies. What does it mean? Because it's the assumption that we all have the same opportunities. You know, if you have the same, if you have the talent and the imagination, you will make it. But that's not always the case. If you come from a disadvantaged community, if you're an immigrant, if you're queer, if you're a woman, if you're just a different shape, there may be obstacles for you to climb. So I was just poking fun at this idea of, you know, merit, because we all know that it's an illusion, it's a fallacy, it's not really true. There are people who have eons of privilege ahead of them. If you started drinking tea with your father's boss, there's a probability he will give you a job when that day and time comes, you know. So it's all these different variables that seem to mess with our blessings.
Mm-hmm.
That's the essence of the poem.
Mm-hmm. And out of that, you started a series, right? I have images. I will share my screen now.
Yeah.
Just to show. And while I'm sharing it for the others to see, maybe you... Yeah. Maybe you tell us a little bit about the materials you used I'd be very interested in that, so I'm just going to
Wait.
here. Oh no, I have to go here first. It's very overwhelming to be the moderator and the technical. Share starten. Then here.
Well, it is.
Thank you. So let's go in the full screen now. Yeah.
All right. So this is an ongoing experimentation for me. I've always been sort of obsessed with paper as a material, and because for me, I don't know, I like paper. I like how versatile it is. I like how accommodating it is. I like how available it is. So I've been trying to. It's an ongoing experiment that I started, I think, late 2019, making my own canvases using paper. And what you're looking at is basically a handmade canvas made out of tissue paper and raffia. Materials generally interest me because all materials have a history. All materials have a tension. All materials have a texture. So sometimes the choice of a material tells half the story. Now, when I use paper, for me, it's already a poem because we know paper as one that has always been written on. So already that takes care of a quarter of the story. And it's one of the reasons I tentatively call this body of works visual poetries. I don't know if they're truly visual poetries, but I've got a lifetime to figure that out. So I will not try and debate that. But what I do know is that the images that I finally work with are inspired by the texts that I write. And as you see, there are 4 images, and each of them is just basically following the different cues that each of the stanzas are giving me. Maybe another thing to note is sometimes I add text into these artworks. Sometimes I don't. I try to let the process be very organic because I feel if the word exists, then I don't need to describe the exact thing in the visual. So the visual are and the words are sisters. They're not identical twins. Is what I'm trying to say. So it could be completely different. They are fraternal twins, they're sisters. I'm trying to remember the other half of the question, I think.
Well, I think you told us a little bit about the material. I was wondering, you told me when we were talking in Kampala, you told me when I was still there, you told me that you use material that is in your surroundings, right? And that it is something that has somehow also political aspect to it, because it is nothing that must be bought. You don't necessarily use material that you need to buy at a shop, which costs a lot, which also plays into the art canon, that material must be very highly valuable, etc. This is something that really interested me because it has a feminist aspect as well, again, because it is a method that everyone can use, and it's something that is not only segregated and there for people who already come out of the field where things like that can be afforded. So how would you say how do you stroll through a city then? Is it sometimes that you wonder, or you look, how did it change your gaze towards your surroundings?
I got into this a bit accidentally. I was at the university studying a degree and I was a broke art student. So that generally meant that I couldn't afford the traditional materials. I could not afford the paint, the canvas. I could barely afford food for that matter. So the dustbin became my resource because I would go there there and find discarded things that I would use. And this story is not unique to me. I think every art student has raided the trash can at one point, I would assume. But and it stayed with me. It never left me, because then it became almost like a site of resistance, because I started questioning, does reuse mean less value? The fact that I'm using an item, the fact that I'm using the cheapest of the material, does that mean less value? Of course, in that moment, I was working completely unconsciously of all the politics that surround materials, especially the artwork. But now, as a practicing artist, I'm beginning to understand. Obviously, you can hear people saying like, oh, the most valuable artworks are made out of oil paint, and this oil paint comes from Italy, and then you're using horse brushes, and with all due respect to the Italians and their fine making of paints and plucking of horsehair to make the horsehair brushes, but horses are not native to where it comes from. Oil paint is not native to where it comes from. We've got other alternatives. And of course, in a contemporary world where we have a lot of waste, and I don't want to sound like a broken recycle artist here. I just want to make a case for the fact that the artwork is more important than the material. But that has taken me a process of constantly experimenting with this material. And I think one of the reasons I stick with paper, because it's considered the least valuable material in the art world. And that sort of appeals to me, because it's a metaphor for very many things. If you look at during the pandemic or during the lockdowns, the people who were doing the menial jobs, the blue-collar jobs, before the pandemic, they were considered the least valuable. And then when the pandemic happened, everybody stayed at home except those people. That should tell us something about how skewed our ideas of value are, Like, we need to have a rethink on this idea of value. Then when we talk about things like carbon footprint, in Uganda, we didn't have a factory that manufactures canvases. We don't have factories that manufacture paint that is made for artists. So if I have to get these materials, I have to send them, and then they are put on a bus, and then they are brought to me. So this makes me think of, even be using this material in the first place. Like, what connection do I have with this material that's coming from India or from China? And so I continue to work with paper, because there's a printing district in Kampala. There's a lot of waste paper that I just get my giant plastic bag and I go and fill my bag with it and I bring it back. There's a lot of office waste that my friends deliver to my house, and I find ways to reuse it. And my experiment with tissue paper, obviously I can walk to the supermarket, which is just nearby, pick up some and come and experiment with it. So in terms of the statement that I'm saying, maybe it's not overtly political, but I'm trying to say that, what am I trying to say? I will figure it. I have time to figure it.
You have time to figure it.
Whatever you can take out of the artwork.
No.
Whatever you can take out of the artwork.
I think personally, you really said something lovely about using what is around you and about what is, using what is indigenous to your artwork. I find that really beautiful because you are existing in your own standard and you're not trying to aim for something that's not applicable to you as an artist. And I think it's a definite plus that, this seems like a very eco-friendly way of doing art. Your pieces are absolutely gorgeous. I love the forms of the women and the greenery and how the forms of the women relate to the greenery. I feel like there's a whole story there. They are like visual pieces of poetry. I appreciate so much that you use found objects. And I think that that's one of my ideals when it comes to practicing theatre, is taking it out of the formal space and putting it into the community that it's trying to reach. Mm-hmm. And just from what you've said so far, you're halfway there. That's what I've gotten. Is that you're using your space as an advantage to you, and it's informing your work actively. Yeah. You know, it's not just a passive influence. You are actively drawing physically and psychologically on the space around you. And I think that's what makes this work so unique.
Totally.
Yeah.
Sarah, thank you so much for the summary. I really agree with you there. I just got a sign that we have to watch the time, and maybe there are questions from the audience as well towards maybe the poetry, towards your position and your practice in Kampala, either from YouTube or from here. So I think if there are questions from YouTube, you can send them in the chat. It's not possible. Sad. Okay. Well, then we can only collect questions here if there are some. Maybe there are none. I don't know. Everyone has to think maybe first. I give them a second. No? Well, then there's maybe a question. Like how long do we have? Okay, we only have 5 minutes left. So maybe if we only have that little time, then I would go with the question: what we can do as feminists to ally and make the safe spaces we have bigger, and what we need to address to do that.
What we can do as feminists to ally and make these spaces bigger and more accessible. I have maybe 2 answers, and the first was mentioned by Pamela already. We can de-intellectualize these spaces. So a feminist space doesn't have to be full of metaphysical, esoteric conversation. It can literally just be a place where women come to love on each other and support each other and correct each other lovingly, and offer constructive criticism to each other's work. And I say work with intention because I think feminism is best applied to work and not to lifestyle, because everyone has a very, very different and individual lifestyle. We can de-intellectualize the space, and we can also, Lord Jesus, there goes the other one. I promise I had another one.
Well, maybe
Pamela.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I'll call up what you say, but I would just take a different tangent where I say feminism is a lifestyle. I think this is my experience, is that the first time I encountered feminism, I encountered it in an intellectual space, at a workshop, at a seminar. But I am actively trying to find the everyday in feminism. How do you practice everyday feminism? It's not different to call yourself a feminist and practice the complete opposite of what feminism is. And of course, as feminists, we still fight with who do we invite into our spaces. It goes against everything we believe, but we're trying to figure out who enters, who doesn't, who what. So there is a constant, and talk about the turfs. Anyway, there is a constant tension, even in the movement itself. So I would throw it back to us to find the everyday in feminism. How do you raise your girls? How do you raise your sons? Are you still one of that person who says, oh, don't let the boys do the dishes or what. And for Christ's sake, girls should learn to be better survivors of this thing. I mean, it has nothing to do with gender. Just learn to take care of yourself. Where I come from, boys are literally incompetent in terms of taking care of themselves. They can't cook, they can't wash, they can't clean. Jesus Christ. So for me, it's those little things. How are you talking to your daughter? Are you telling her sit properly, you know? Already sexualizing her at a very young age. How are you treating, you know, subjects of periods and mental health? Do you tell the boys, oh, get out of the room so I can speak to the girls, you know? If you're having the condom conversation, why are you, you know, having it only with your son? Have it with your daughters too. Empower them to, you know, to carry their own protection and to offer it in situations where the other partner doesn't have protection. So for me, these are everyday things that end up to be extremely useful to everyday living as a feminist. You know, if you're a leader, if you're a CEO or in a position of leadership, how feminist is your organization and the way you do. There's lots of material and texts on feminist leadership and approaches in terms of design, in terms of, if you're designing, for Christ's sake, don't design chairs that don't have room for hips. Like, what's your problem? Think about these things and make space, you know, like Jennifer told us. And it's just every day, it's just you and your, you know, and your work and your ideas. Always keep double checking to see, because that's why for me it's a lifestyle. It's not an end goal. You have to keep improving, you have to keep adjusting, you have to keep double checking, you have to keep testing yourself for any hidden biases, because I can assure you they're there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks a lot. Is the second thought there, Sarah, or did it go with the wind?
No, it has returned. And I think I'm going to sit on it, following what Pamela said. I think I'm going to sit on it and just ruminate a little bit.
Right? Yeah, it was a very good speech at the end of this really nice conversation with both of you. I'm really happy that we had you here tonight. I could show you to friends and other people here, and yeah, that you were so open with your art. So yeah, so great to talk to you, and I hope that we might see each other again at some point. We will definitely stay in contact, and just many thank you. I think we give one last big applause here. Find good back to your bed. Now you can go to the safe space and rest, lie down. It's 1 hour later now in Kampala than here, so you deserve it. Take a rest, and I hope I speak to you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.